Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions, the mystery of Çatalhöyük, the 9,000-year-old city with no streets and no leaders. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. 9,000 years ago, 10,000 people lived packed together in a settlement in central Turkey, where every house was built wall-to-wall with its neighbors. There were no streets, and the only way to enter your home was through a hole in the roof. The dead were buried beneath the living room floor. The walls were painted with elaborate murals of hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and human hands. And across 800 years of continuous occupation, the size of every house remained the same. No mansion, no hovel, no palace, no slum. Çatalhöyük, excavated first by James Mellaart in the 1960 and then in depth by Ian Hodder of Stanford from 1993 to 2018, is one of the most thoroughly studied Neolithic sites on Earth. What it shows is a form of human community that simply does not fit any existing model of how cities are supposed to work. There was no market, no administrative center, no evidence of a chief, a priest, a king, or any individual who held authority over the others. 10,000 people lived together for 18 centuries without, as far as archaeologists can determine, anyone being in charge. How and why did they eventually abandon it? These remain two of the most challenging questions in all of human prehistory. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the broader phenomenon of lost civilizations, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The ocean has a long memory. As the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, sea levels worldwide rose by more than 120 meters, enough to drown entire coastal civilizations that may have flourished along shorelines that no longer exist. The continental shelves that now lie submerged beneath shallow coastal seas were once habitable land. River deltas, bays, and estuaries that today lie underwater were once the most attractive real estate on Earth, rich in resources, temperate in climate, and accessible by sea. If ancient peoples built their settlements where resources were most abundant, then much of the archaeological record of early civilization may be sitting on the ocean floor, invisible to conventional excavation. This is not speculation. Marine archaeologists have already found submerged ruins at dozens of locations worldwide, off the coasts of India, Japan, Cuba, and the Mediterranean islands. In some cases, these structures are clearly artificial: stone walls, carved steps, and rectilinear platforms that could not have formed naturally. The academic debate is not whether these structures exist, but what they mean. Were they built by unknown pre-flood cultures, or were they coastal settlements of known civilizations gradually abandoned as waters rose? The answer, in many cases, remains open. What oral traditions add to this picture is equally significant. Cultures living on or near the sea throughout the tropics and subtropics carry remarkably consistent flood narratives, stories of a great inundation that drowned an earlier world. These are not borrowed from one another through colonial contact. They predate European exploration. They appear to be independent memories of a shared catastrophe, the end of the last ice age, when the world coastlines changed forever and entire ways of life were drowned. The civilizations that built on those shores, if they existed, vanished beneath the waves. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns, in science, demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the core evidence surrounding Çatalhöyük. The 9,000-year-old city with no streets and no leaders is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Çatalhöyük was occupied continuously from approximately 7,500 to 5,700 BC, making it one of the oldest and largest Neolithic settlements ever excavated. The site in south-central Turkey consists of 18 distinct occupation levels stacked vertically, each generation building new mud brick houses directly on top of the demolished walls of the previous layer. At its peak, the settlement covered approximately 13 hectares and housed an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 people simultaneously. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the most distinctive architectural feature of Çatalhöyük was the complete absence of streets or ground-level doors. Houses were built directly against each other with no gaps between them. Residents entered and exited through rectangular openings in the flat rooftops, climbing down wooden ladders into the living space. The rooftops functioned as the community's shared public space, a horizontal street system above rather than between the buildings, allowing movement across the entire settlement. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this. And that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine skeletal analysis of more than 700 individuals buried beneath the floors of Çatalhöyük houses, conducted by physical anthropologist Clark Spencer Larson of Ohio State University, found remarkably equal levels of nutrition, bone density, and physical stress markers across the population, regardless of gender, age, or location within the settlement. No individual showed the enriched diet or reduced physical labor associated with elite status in other ancient societies, providing biological evidence for the settlement's apparent social equality. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the interior walls of Çatalhöyük houses were plastered and repainted up to 100 times over a single building's lifetime, with murals depicting geometric patterns, hunting scenes showing men with bows pursuing wild bulls and deer, human hands, and occasionally vultures picking at headless human figures. Mounted cattle skulls were set into the walls. Archaeologist Ian Hodder has interpreted these features as evidence of a rich ritual life centered on the individual household rather than any communal temple or public institution. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of figurines recovered from Çatalhöyük include a famous seated female figure excavated by James Mellaart in 1961, flanked by two large cats, which Mellaart interpreted as a mother goddess, a claim that generated enormous popular interest and spawned an entire mythology about Çatalhöyük as a goddess, worshipping matriarchal society. Later excavations led by Ian Hodder found that the female figurine was statistically rare, that most figurines depicted animals, and that Mellaart's interpretation was substantially overstated. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Çatalhöyük was abandoned around 5700 BC, as its population appears to have dispersed across the surrounding landscape, rather than collapsing catastrophically. The reasons for abandonment remain debated. Ian Hodder has proposed that changing social conditions, including the development of new settlement forms with actual streets and public spaces, made the rooftop entry packed house model obsolete. Climate data from the period shows increased aridity, and some researchers suggest that declining agricultural productivity on the surrounding plain contributed to the gradual dispersal. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain Çatalhöyük, the 9,000-year-old city with no streets and no leaders. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that Ian Hodder of Stanford University, who directed excavations at Çatalhöyük from 1993 to 2018, argues that it represented a genuine early experiment in egalitarian urban living, where social identity was organized around the household rather than lineage, gender, or class. The main objection to his interpretation is that the absence of obvious elite markers does not prove equality. Subtle forms of social hierarchy may exist that leave no clear archaeological signature. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that some archaeologists, including Lynn Meskel of Columbia University, argue that Çatalhöyük should not be called a city at all in any functional sense, but rather a very large aggregated village, a ritual community whose density reflected shared religious practice rather than economic specialization or political organization. On this view, it was not a failed city, but a successful village of a type that had no future in a world trending towards stratified states. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that a third interpretation emphasizes that Çatalhöyük may represent an early urban experiment that simply failed to develop the institutional hierarchy that sustained larger and longer-lasting cities. Complexity theorists, including Peter Turchin, argue that egalitarian settlements above a certain size eventually fragment without hierarchy to coordinate collective action, and the gradual abandonment of Çatalhöyük over several centuries may illustrate exactly this dynamic in prehistoric form. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers working from the same body of evidence reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Çatalhöyük, the 9,000-year-old city with no streets and no leaders, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes skeletal analysis of over 700 burials from beneath Çatalhöyük house floors, published by Clark Spencer Larson and colleagues in 2015 in the journal PLOS One, found no statistically significant differences in nutritional status, skeletal stress markers, or trauma between any segments of the population. Both men and women showed similar levels of physical labor. This biological equality across the entire buried population is the strongest direct evidence for the settlement's egalitarian social structure. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented isotopic analysis of human bones and teeth from Çatalhöyük, conducted by Catherine Twiss and colleagues, found that many individuals had grown up in different geographic locations before moving to the settlement, indicating that Çatalhöyük attracted people from across a wide surrounding region rather than being a closed, locally reproducing community. This suggests it functioned as a regional gathering place with a significant transient or immigrant population alongside a stable residential core. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed architectural measurement of all excavated houses at Çatalhöyük, compiled across multiple field seasons by Hodder's team, confirmed that house floor areas remained consistent within a narrow range across all 18 occupation levels and all parts of the site. No structure identifiable as a palace, communal hall, temple, or administrative building has been found in any level. This architectural homogeneity, sustained across 800 years of continuous habitation, is the most visible expression of the settlement's structural equality. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Çatalhöyük, the 9,000-year-old city with no streets and no leaders. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Ian Hodder's 25-year excavation program at Çatalhöyük, completed in 2018, produced one of the most detailed pictures of Neolithic life ever assembled. The site challenges the conventional assumption that urban density requires hierarchy, specialization, and institutionalized leadership to function. It also challenges the popular goddess culture narrative that Mellaart's early work inspired. What remains genuinely mysterious is whether Çatalhöyük's egalitarianism was a cultural achievement or simply a reflection of a community too small and too early to have developed the inequality that later complex societies took for granted. The site is a UNESCO World Heritage candidate and continues to attract researchers from disciplines ranging from architecture to genetics. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made, new analyses are being published, new voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Çatalhöyük, the 9,000-year-old city with no streets and no leaders, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Catalhoyuk ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle, it is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.